I'm going to introduce Roxana Siaca, a campaign organizer from Worker Justice of New York.
Hi everybody. 60 years after the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Black women continue to face racist and sexist barriers that leave them undervalued and underpaid. I was educated at an event back in July, similar to this event acknowledging Pay Equity Day. The Worker Justice Center of New York is proud to partner with the Pay Equity Coalition to amplify and affirm that we must continue to stand together and take action to close the pay gap. As an organizer, acknowledging the gender pay gap means advocating for higher wages, specifically because so many of the workers we serve at Worker Justice Center are Latina workers overrepresented in industries that lack basic workplace protection. Because the wage gap varies widely by community, some Latina immigrant workers' citizenship status often makes them more vulnerable to wage theft and sexual harassment. Farm workers, domestic workers, immigrant, migrant, and seasonal workers continue to be left out of critical employment protections. Until the women who perform some of the most essential jobs are able to achieve economic security, our economy and communities will not be as strong as they can possibly be. This impact is not merely felt in Latino communities and households where Latina mothers working outside of the home on average earn sometimes 51 cents for every dollar paid to a white man. In the Rochester community, where 1 out of every 2 child lives in poverty, it is essential that we use all of the tools at our disposal to protect Latina workers. Women's work overall is less valued than work done by men, not because our labor is intrinsically less valuable to society, but merely because it is work done by women. And don't get me started on the gender wealth gap. Women overall hold a mere 32% of the wealth men have accumulated. For Black, Latina, Indigenous, and others who are economically marginalized, this loss is especially devastating. This inequity impacts our entire community because these lifetime losses rob us of the opportunity to invest in our education, home ownership, and plan for retirement. The long-term impact on morale, individual health, and well-being is devastating. So what are we doing? I've heard from electeds here say advocacy without legislation will not close this wage gap. We must work with our officials to follow through on their commitment to legislate and ensure a stable economy through quality wages. We're fighting in Albany for a higher minimum wage upstate because workers in Rochester and Westchester deserve the same wage floor. But we can take this fight local too. We are working with labor unions and local community groups to form a coalition that fights for a fair wage here in Rochester, because we know no matter where we work, women of color face a wage gap. We must protect excluded workers, freelance, undocumented, recently incarcerated workers that continue to be unemployed by supporting common sense legislation, such as the Unemployment Bridge Program that will provide a lifeline for 750,000 workers. In order to remedy wage theft, the Empire Worker Protection Act expands the capacity of the state to address equal pay violations and other employee exploitation, undermining New York's labor policy accomplishments. And what can we do? In order to address the Latina pay gap, it is essential that we use all of the tools at our disposal to raise wages for Latina workers in Rochester, from addressing wage theft to raising our local minimum wage. Tompkins County in Ithaca just passed a resolution to explore a higher local minimum wage. We can explore and support similar pathways. Employers need to commit to continuous improvement, enacting policies that will put women on a level playing field with men. Finally, in Rochester, where almost 1/3 of the population lives below the poverty line, we cannot afford to ignore the lingering inequity that is the result of historical, societal, and political legacies that persist today and leave Latinas stranded at the intersection of racial, ethnic, and gender inequities. Let's take action because we are worth the whole dollar.